Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to get into something that I always find super interesting, multilingualism. But we're not just, chatting about the perks of speaking a bunch of languages. We're going deeper, looking at how two European countries, Switzerland and Sweden, are tackling this whole thing in their schools.
And we're really going beyond just skimming the surface of policies here.
Uh-huh.
We're diving into the work of Adrian Lundberg, who's gone deep, like really deep, into how these countries are approaching multilingualism. But maybe even more importantly, how teachers are experiencing these policies in their classrooms every day.
Okay, you had me at going deep. So to set the stage, we've got three of Lundberg's papers. There's one from 2018 where he's comparing Switzerland and Sweden's official policies on multilingual education. Then there's another from 2019 that gets into what Swedish teachers actually think about all of this. And to round it out, we've got this 2020 paper where he breaks down something called Q methodology.
Right. And Q methodology is actually a super fascinating approach to understanding those teacher beliefs that he's getting at. And it's also worth noting that the timing of Lundberg's research is really interesting. He focused on this period around 2009 when both Switzerland and Sweden made some pretty big changes to their education policies.
So it's like we're getting this snapshot of a really pivotal moment. We're not just talking about the distant past here. It's super relevant to what's happening right now.
Exactly. This research gives us a lot of insights into how societies are dealing with, all the complexities of multilingualism in a world that's changing faster than ever. And speaking of fascinating, Switzerland really embraced this idea of plurilingualism, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. Tell us more about that. What does that even mean? Is it just about teaching kids more languages in school?
Well, get this. Switzerland actually put plurilingualism into their constitution. It's not just a policy. It's like a core value for them. And it's not just about immigrants learning the language either. They see every single person as potentially plurilingual. They get that knowing multiple languages is valuable for everyone.
Wow, that's next level. They're basically saying, hey, we're a country of multilingual people and we're proud of it.
Exactly. And they actually use this whole plurilingual approach to help different linguistic communities understand each other better. It's like built into their national identity.
Okay, I'm starting to see how different Switzerland and Sweden really are when it comes to this. So we've got Switzerland over here embracing all these languages. What's the deal with Sweden?
So Sweden's interesting because, they're definitely trying to be more open to multilingualism, but Lundberg says there's still this underlying thing he calls a monolingual habitus.
A monolingual habitus. Okay, I think I need a bit of a translation on that one. What does that even mean?
Basically, it's this deeply ingrained assumption, often unspoken, that Swedish is the norm, like it's the default. You know how sometimes there are these invisible forces that shape how we think and act. It's like that.
So even if they're, officially trying to be more inclusive, this underlying bias towards Swedish is still there.
Yeah, pretty much. And you can even see it in the everyday language people use. Like, you'll hear people talk about multilingual students, but a lot of times what they really mean is students from immigrant backgrounds. It kind of sets them apart from everyone else.
Ah, I see. So even the words people use can reinforce this idea of Swedish as the normal one.
Right. And even though Sweden updated its whole Language Act back in 2009, their main focus was making Swedish stronger. They mentioned other languages, but it wasn't the same as Switzerland's whole everyone's plurilingual thing,
It's kind of like that saying, actions speak louder than words, right? Like they're trying to change how they talk about it, but those deeper habits are tricky to shake.
Totally. It reminds me of something Lundberg quotes from another scholar, Cabau, who said it's less about putting languages on a pedestal and more about valuing the amazing tapestry of human experiences and ideas that those languages reflect.
Which brings us to those Swedish classrooms. What's actually going on when the school doors are closed and the teachers and students are all together? That's where Lundberg's 2019 research comes in. That's when he used this method called Q methodology to really get inside the heads of Swedish teachers and figure out how they feel about all this multilingualism stuff.
And Q methodology is such a cool tool because it goes way beyond simple yes or no questions. It lets researchers see this whole spectrum of opinions and beliefs within a group.
So instead of just saying teachers are all for this or teachers are all against this, we get a much clearer picture, right?
Exactly. It's way more nuanced. So in this case, Lundberg had teachers look at different statements about language and learning. And one example is multilingual students really need to master Swedish ASAP, even if it means their home language takes a bit of a back seat. And the teachers had to sort these statements, and by seeing how they sorted them, He could figure out what their priorities were, what they really believed deep down about language and how it works in a classroom.
So it's like a window into their thinking. I love
Mhm.
it. So what did he find? Were all those Swedish teachers totally on board with this shift toward making multilingualism the norm, or were some of them a bit hesitant?
You know, it's funny you should mention that whole monolingual habitus thing from before, because it definitely popped up in what he found, but maybe not in the way you'd expect. Lundberg found that there were basically three main viewpoints among the teachers. To make it easy, we can call them the welcoming ones, the unsure ones, and the it'll all work out ones.
Okay, I am loving these names. So tell me more. Let's start with these welcoming ones. They sound like they're ready to embrace a classroom full of different languages, right?
Yeah, for sure. These teachers were all about it. They were convinced that having lots of languages in the classroom is a good thing. They thought that when kids' home languages are valued and appreciated, they actually learn better.
That just makes so much sense to me. Like we always say, every student has something unique to offer. But I'm curious about the unsure ones. What were they unsure about?
That's interesting because this group was actually more common in schools that didn't have as many multilingual students. It's like they didn't really see the point of multilingualism as clearly, and they usually thought learning Swedish was the most important thing, above everything else.
So it's possible that if they had more experience, more exposure to kids from lots of different backgrounds, they might feel differently. It's like they haven't really had the chance to see firsthand how awesome it can be.
Right, exactly. And researchers like Lundberg look into that kind of thing too, how teachers' own experiences shape what they believe. And then you've got the it'll all work out bunch. And, well, just like their name says, they were kind of taking a more laid-back approach. They knew multilingualism was a thing, but they didn't necessarily think teachers needed to make huge changes to how they did things.
That is so interesting. It's you have this whole mix of people. Like whenever a new idea comes along, you have the people who are like, "Yes, let's do this. This is amazing." And then you have the people who need a little more convincing, a little more time to see how it works. And then you have the people who are just kind of like, "Yeah, yeah, it'll all be fine, whatever."
That's a perfect way to put it. And that brings us to a really important point. Even if you have these really clear policies, like in Sweden, that say, we're all about multilingualism now,
Yeah.
the people who actually have to make it happen, the teacher as well, they have their own experiences, their own deeply held beliefs, and those things can be really powerful. And what happens is you can end up with this gap between what's written down in the policy and what's really going on in schools.
And that's where that 2020 paper about Q methodology really helps us dig deeper, doesn't it?
It really does. It shows how important it is to get these viewpoints, like really understand them if we're going to make education better.
Yeah.
It can't just be these policies written down somewhere. You know, you've got to think about the people who are actually doing the work, how they feel, what they think about it all.
Totally. It's like when companies try to change their culture.
Uh-huh.
They can write a fancy new mission statement and everything.
Right.
But if the people who work there aren't actually living those values every day, nothing's really going to change.
Exactly. And what's so interesting is this isn't just about schools, right?
Yeah.
This disconnect between the policy and what actually happens, how our own beliefs get in the way, it comes up everywhere.
Oh, yeah. All the time. I can think of so many examples like healthcare, societal changes, even personal relationships, right? Like
Yeah.
we can have the best intentions in the world, the best strategies, but if like deep down we don't really believe in it, it's so much harder to make any progress.
It is. And if we bring it back to Switzerland and Sweden, and those classrooms we were talking about, Lundberg's research points out some pretty big challenges for both of them.
Hmm.
Even in Switzerland, where they've got plurilingualism in their constitution,
Wow.
it's still hard to shift those deeply ingrained beliefs that some teachers have.
It makes you think, though, like, even if those Swiss teachers are taught that all languages are valuable, like, that's what they're learning. Are
Oh.
they actually doing that every day with their students? Like, are they really living it? It's like those companies that are always talking about diversity and inclusion, but then you look at what it's actually like to work there.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's one of those things where you have to look beyond the surface, right? It's not enough to just have the right words. You've got to understand those everyday experiences, those hidden assumptions, all those unconscious biases we have that can really affect how people treat each other, even when it goes against what they say they believe in.
Totally. And it reminds us that changing how we think, especially when it comes to these deep-seated beliefs, these cultural norms, it's not easy. It doesn't just happen overnight. It's messy, it's complicated, and it takes more than just changing the rules. We have to really listen to the people who are actually doing the work, you know? Try to see things from that perspective.
Absolutely. And it raises a really interesting question, I think. What if, instead of seeing these language differences as a problem that we have to solve, what if we saw them as something valuable for everyone?
Now, that is a good question. Tell me more.
Imagine a classroom where every student, no matter what language they speak at home, is encouraged to share their languages and cultures. And I don't just mean tolerated, I mean really celebrated.
Right.
Not only would that make everyone feel more welcome, more included, which is huge, but it would be a huge learning opportunity for everyone involved.
I love that. It's like taking something that a lot of people see as a weakness, like, oh, they don't speak the language, and turning it into a strength. Instead of trying to make everyone fit into this one box, this monolingual box, we're saying, hey, let's celebrate the fact that we have all these different languages, all these different ways of seeing the world.
Exactly. And think about how much kids would learn not just about other cultures, but about how their own brains work. Think about the advantages they'd have later on, in their careers, just from growing up in that kind of environment.
Okay. I am convinced we have to rethink this whole thing, like totally rethink how we approach all these language differences.
We do. And it's not just about schools either. This shift, this way of thinking could change how we do so many things, how we design our public services, how we talk to each other at work, even just how we interact with our neighbors.
Yeah, like creating a society where everyone feels valued
Yeah.
and respected, and they feel like they can use their whole language, their whole voice.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the best part about Lundberg's research is it helps us see all the different sides of this multilingualism thing. It's not about finding this magic solution, this one thing that works for everyone. It's more about recognizing that everyone has their own viewpoint. And yeah, there are challenges for sure, but there are also incredible opportunities, when we embrace all this linguistic diversity.
And at the end of the day, I think it reminds us that change has to start with understanding. If we really want to create learning environments that are more inclusive, that really work for everyone, we have to start listening to those different voices, to those lived experiences that don't always fit neatly into the policies we write.
Right.
Because those experiences, those individual stories, that's where the real insights are.
Wow, you've really given us a lot to think about today. This whole topic of multilingualism, education, even just how we think about language in general.
It really goes so much deeper, It's about how we value diversity, any kind of diversity, and how we create spaces where everyone feels like they belong.
Yeah.
Where they can be themselves,
Totally. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
That's a good question. I think the next time you're talking about language, maybe it's at your kid's school, maybe it's at work, or even just with friends.
Yeah.
Remember Lundberg's research?
Think about those teachers.
Yes. Think about those teachers. The welcoming ones, the unsure ones, even those it'll all work out ones.
Each one with their own perspective, their own experiences that shaped how they see things. It reminds us that there's not just this one right answer,
Right.
But if we want to move forward, we've got to understand where everyone else is coming from,
Totally. And we have to be willing to challenge our own assumptions too, right?
Yes.
Even those little monolingual habitus moments that we might not even realize we're having.
Exactly. It's about asking ourselves, are we really valuing all the amazing things that multilingualism brings? Or are we still holding on to this idea that there's only one right way to speak, one right language to know?
Such a good point. And maybe, just maybe, we can start to see things a little differently,
Yeah.
Instead of thinking of all these language differences as problems to fix, what if they were bridges? Like bridges to understanding each other better, to being more creative, more connected.
I love that, bridges. That's beautiful. That's the world I want to live in.
Me too. And honestly, I feel like this conversation, this whole deep dive has given us the knowledge and frankly, the inspiration to actually go out and create that world. It starts with one conversation, one classroom, one community at a time.
I love that.
Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive today. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure was all mine, truly.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us. Keep asking those tough questions. Keep listening to those different voices, those different experiences, and keep diving deep into the things you're curious about. You never know what you might discover. We'll see you next time.